Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.
Hey there, and welcome back to Speech Pitch by Iska Sak. I'm Wen Xifei.
And I'm Pascal Hecker, and we will be your hosts for this episode.
Today, we are very happy to have Matt Kohler. Matt is an associate professor of language and technology and the director of the master's program in voice technology at the University of Groningen, campus Fryslân. Welcome to Speech Pitch, Matt.
Thanks very much. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm really happy to be here with you today and very excited to get to know you guys a little too.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. So, Matt, we will start asking you some background information. We're very happy to know where are you from and where did you grow up?
Sure. Okay. Well, a bit personal, but let's just jump right into it. So I'm originally from the U.S. I grew up on the East Coast of the U.S. in Massachusetts, and I began my academic career at the University of Massachusetts, where I did a bachelor's in philosophy and a minor in Mandarin Chinese. So that's pretty far from speech tech, but it gets closer. Then I did my graduate studies at NYU in New York. And eventually I earned my PhD at the University of Amsterdam in linguistics. And I was working there on topics around language documentation. So I worked on studying very small languages in remote communities of the Andean foothills in Peru mainly. And well, after that, I began the startup in the Netherlands that worked a little bit more on the AI side. And the timing was such that the University of Groningen was opening up a new faculty called the Faculty Campus Fryslân, as you said earlier. And it was this kind of interdisciplinary and really nice faculty focused on social impact and new lines of research. And I thought, oh, this is the best of both worlds, like part startup, part university. This is the place for me. And that's where I landed, I don't know, around 8 years ago or so. And that's where I still am today.
Yeah, super cool. That's quite some moved career, and also was quite curious exactly how you ended up in Groningen, and I think you made a nice point of it. So how is that that's still holding up after 8 years? Would you say it's what it promised to be? What are the best aspects that you like about it most in Groningen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so first disclaimer is that the University of Groningen campus Fryslân is actually in Fryslân. So we're part of the University of Groningen, but our faculty building is in another province, not far from Groningen, 20 minutes or so by train. And it's, I think, a great place. When I first joined, there was no faculty building, there was no infrastructure, there was really just a bunch of academics and administrators gathered in a temporary working space. And it was really fun to be part of the development of a faculty ex nihilo, from nothing, and kind of short circuit the entrenchment that some faculties have, or many, or maybe even all, where there's certain ways of doing things, there's certain ways of collaborating with different disciplines. Here we could start with a fresh look and really examine and reflect on what we wanted the culture of our faculty to be and what sorts of disciplines and studies should be there. And well, in the beginning, of course, talk is cheap, so it's fun to think of different ideas and to reflect, but to see it come to fruition at the faculty and to see all the different programs and the diversity of PhD, graduate, and undergraduate research that goes on there, it's really inspiring. To my mind, it's what academia should be, that there's a use for monodisciplinary approaches to studying scientific questions, obviously, it goes without saying. But there's also a use to interdisciplinary ones. And, the word interdisciplinary gets thrown around a lot. But at the end of the day, what does it really mean? For many people, it just means like working on together with somebody from your closest to science, right? So if you're a chemist, you might work with a physicist, and you think, oh, wow, that's really interdisciplinary. But at our faculty, interdisciplinary means actually interdisciplinary. So we get to really work with people who I normally would never see or would never be on my radar at a traditional faculty. And that really breeds kind of creative thinking and as a good opportunity to find new ways of working with people who would normally never be on your radar. So it's terrific. Yeah, I'm very happy here. And I have a great team and really great colleagues. And I can't imagine working anywhere else. I'll put it that way.
So, Matt, you mentioned that actually you are very enjoying working with people with diversity backgrounds. So we noticed that you had a background in Mandarin Chinese. So what actually led you to decide to study linguistics or speech for your later degrees?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, coming from a bachelor's in philosophy and trying to get into the linguistics program at NYU, that was something that I had to address because people thought, what are you doing? Maybe you want to stay with philosophy of language. And I said, no, because actually it was through Chinese, because it was through working with a language that was so different from my own structurally, phonetically, phonologically, and also in many other respects, that I began to really see language in a way that I previously hadn't. As a linguistic student, of course, you see data from other languages and you reflect on, what, I don't know, similarities or differences. In my day at NYU, we talked a lot about universals, of course, for obvious generativist reasons. But Chinese, in some ways, made me really reflect on actually language itself and what is it. And I thought, I won't understand this through the mechanisms I was taught in philosophy, which were really revealing and profound sometimes. But I wanted to approach it in a rigorous, replicable, and scientific way. And that brought me to linguistics. And as soon as I got into linguistics, you see right away that linguists use equipment, right? So not just microphones and headphones, but all kinds of equipment with which I'm sure you're very familiar already. And that brought me face to face with the limitations of that kind of technical approach. And at the same time, it was beginning to see developments in the field of speech tech, although it wasn't called speech tech then, it was maybe something else. At that time, I thought, this is really getting us closer and closer to what really makes me tick as a scientist, like what the interface between science, technology, and cognition. And I think that's really where speech technology finds itself. And that's what really resonates with me as an academic, as a thinker, and as a human being, actually surrounded by technology.
Yeah, especially this transition toward technology sounds quite interesting. And as I said, like going through your career, then even to this, like very explorative and state-of-the-art research in Groningen, or in Leeuwarden, I think it's called, right?
Yep, correct. Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, like then coming to your present state of the art, basically. So you already hinted that this scientific approach coming from linguistics to philosophy was one big step, and then like now focusing more on like technology in general, how it can shape our understanding of language. What would you summarize your research question or research interest regarding the term technology then currently in Groningen in general?
Thanks. That's a really terrific question. It's something that we struggle with kind of as a team because we have diverse interests in my lab. We work on all kinds of topics, but there are red threads that connect them. And I think one of them is small data, right? So we leave the very important big data questions to big tech, right? They have the data, they're well suited to answer those questions, and they've done really tremendous and remarkable things. We can also critique them, of course. I'm not advocating that this is the gold standard, but what I'm saying is that there's a really important niche for academics to fill in the small tech world. And what we can do is deliver value to our stakeholders, which is communities in which universities are situated, by looking at ways we can support either regional languages, dialects, varieties, but also people with, for example, disordered speech or speaking pathologies, for which there might not be a big market opportunity for those companies, or for any company, frankly, but for which academics are very well positioned to deliver something of value back, regardless of the financial value, for stakeholders or for investors or something like that. And to my mind, that's the point of academics, is to make the world a better place and to help further the boundaries of science, and in so doing, improve the lives of people. And that's what our team works on, and we do it from the approach of small data. We have, of course, kind of financial limitations, like every academic institution, compute limitations, sadly, because we can't. Our supercomputer is not always reliable or only available for very limited times, and all kinds of other constraints. And so we have to make do with what we have. But I think that's a feature, not a bug, right? So we're not trying to build the best performing, most reliable and expensive proposition on the market. We're trying to solve like very focused problems that will bring value to community in which the university is. So if I could be more specific, if you like, since you asked the academic.
That's great. That will be my next question, indeed. But it sounds like a good high level goal, and then it would be great to share some pet projects of yours that you really like see this coming true. And yeah. But thanks, of course, for the input so far.
Sure. Yeah. No, with pleasure. So some example projects we work on right now with members of my lab is, for example, speech synthesis for Fryslân, right? So Fryslân is the language spoken in, of course, the province of Fryslân. It's an under-resourced language with has some resources available through the Friska Academy and through other databases like the Common Voice. But the synthetic voice available for Fryslân right now is not great, if I can speak plainly. So a lot of websites or news sites, for example, have an icon where you can hear the news read to you in a Frisian voice. And it's the kind of quality that after like 5 seconds, you feel like you're going to go crazy, right? And it's not about the language issue. It's just about the melody and intonation, or naturalness is just non-existent. And we thought, well, it doesn't have to be this way, of course. So my PhD student, together supervised with some colleagues here and the Fryslân Academy and formerly Reed Speaker, helped pioneer an approach to developing a more natural Frisian voice that will be released open access and open source for the community. It's almost done already. So soon there'll be demos online. I hope people can hear it for themselves if they like. And it will be I hope, a great resource for people who are visually impaired and want digital documents read to them, or people who are learning Frisian and maybe understand it spoken but not read, which is non-trivial amount of Frisians. And it can help bring the Frisian language into the 21st century with such technical tools, which is not just a marketing gimmick, but is really pivotal, I believe, to the survival of the language into our digital era, right? It's not just a gimmick to make Alexa devices speak Frisian. It's a way to provide support for people who need Frisian read to them, and also for young people who are acquiring the language, to show that, hey, speech tech isn't just for English, German, Spanish, and Chinese, but it's for a smaller language, even smaller than Dutch, like Frisian. And the reason that this tool hasn't been developed, again, by a big company is because, well, all Frisian speakers also speak Dutch, right? And therefore, that if you're going to develop a tool, you might as well just make it in Dutch only. But in fact, there's a large market segment and a large opportunity for offering support for the community by developing tools like this. So that's one, Frisian speech synthesis. We also have another project that's just getting started now on Frisian recognition. So trying to improve the accuracy of Frisian using different techniques, again, relatively small data techniques. And we're also developing a project to help recognize disease like Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases in multilingual speech in the region. And also some more wild ideas. For example, I have some students working on sarcasm recognition, so trying to recognize sarcastic speech, which is also kind of small data, using a very small data set. And then also another student is working on synthesizing sarcastic speech. So you can see why I said in the beginning that it was a broad array. I could go on, but I think it gives you a good idea. The red thread, as I said, is small data and giving back to the community.
Thanks for the great overview over your research topics in Groningen. Next to the red thread of small data, do you have other research interests that you are pursuing?
So thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm personally interested in the interface of topics around like synthesis assessment. So like when I look at how other researchers have investigated the assessment of musical instruments, when sound quality is properly assessed in that kind of context, it's not done with anything like the MOS, right? It's not done on a Likert scale. And there's great research that shows how more holistic approaches to assessing speech can reveal something much more profound and nuanced than a computable score on a scale of 1 to 5. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of, unfairly critical to MOS, and I understand that there's really great work that shows that it's a reliable measure in many respects. But at the same time, I'm also kind of uneasy, I confess, about the criteria of naturalness, right? Like we all think of naturalness as a shortcut to being human-like. But what kind of human, and how like a human, and in what context is that human speaking? The way I speak can be more or less human-like, but I remain a human all the time, right? So too with synthetic voices, I wonder. I even wonder if it's even a valid question to ask how human-like a voice is when spoken in isolation outside of a discourse context, right? Here I'm talking as a linguist, but we linguists know that a voice outside of discourse is different than a voice in discourse, right? Because the meaning is robbed of it, and speech without meaning is sounds, right? In many respects, not entirely. So I also think that when we present speech outside of a discourse context in an experimental construct where it's cut out of a discourse act, and there isn't one to begin with, it's not a voice that listeners are assessing, but the stimulus, right? And a stimulus is a very different thing from a voice. So I would say that such contexts lack ecological validity, by which I mean the experimental design doesn't resemble anything like, something that we do in the day-to-day, right? It's something totally removed from human experience. And, we in our day-to-day life, we never go around assessing how human-like a voice sounds, even a synthetic voice. We just listen to it, right? Or we hear it. That's another question. So I wonder then, and this is kind of the direction of where I'd like to take my research moving forward, is like, number one, is naturalness really a good end goal for synthesis, right? Naturalness according to who? I also would say other criteria are even more important, right? For example, familiarity. wow, that's much more complex, right? And I think much more intimate, and it reflects the intimacy that we have with voice, suitability for a certain use or expectation. Again, these are metrics that are much more used in psycholinguistics or even psychology that I think speech tech could adopt or play with a little bit and get much more profound insight into what kind of voices resonate for what kind of purposes. Likewise for intelligibility, right? What level of intelligibility? Are we talking about the phoneme level, the syllable, the phrase, the sentence, the concept, or something else altogether, or none of these or all of these? And also intelligibility for whom and under what circumstances, like in a noisy environment, in a quiet one, in a lab, where there's crosstalk, where the person has a speaking or hearing shortcoming. And not only then is there a difference between stimuli and speech, but also between the cognitive processes of listening to a stimuli and hearing speech, right? Listening and hearing are not the same thing. Psychologists know that. Cognitive scientists know that. Speech technologists, I posit to you, kind of controversially, don't take that into account. And so I think to make our science more robust, it's worthwhile exploring those avenues of research and reflecting on how those facts can be tested in an experimental protocol. And that's all. That was my 2 cents and my plug for my research ambitions. I'm sorry if it takes too much hot air.
Just out of curiosity, a very like small follow-up on that. Is there some metric or something, or how exactly do you work on, for example, mean opinion score, MOS, alternatives, and so on? Is there something concrete that you have in hand there for research?
Yeah, what I would like to do is explore and take inspiration from how they do it in music design or musical instrument quality testing, right? So, for example, when people develop reverb on a acoustic guitar, they're not using a mean opinion score. They might be using, for example, some NLP approaches. So they might ask people to describe the experience of that tool and how it works for them, and when they would use it, or when they would like to hear it, or ask them the way that they would assess it, and use the terms that the user or musician himself or herself uses. So they don't use the same language we do when we talk about musical experiences. And so too, when you hear a synthetic voice, the concept of naturalness is something invented by technicians for technicians, right? But when I ask an ordinary person, what do you remember about that voice? The way they answer that might reveal to us how such a scale could look. Oh, they might say, "Oh, I remember it's familiar to me because it sounds like the voice that I hear or that I remember from, this other context." Or they might say it sounds kind of sharp and a little bit aggressive. Oh, okay. Now sharpness and aggression might be, in this context anyway, relevant parameters to test. But to assume that there's a one size fits all metric that we can use to measure all synthetic voices in all contexts, I think misses the diversity of kinds of experiences of speech. And that's a pity, because when I talk to a person, I remember aspects of their voice, and none of it is naturalness, right? That's not what I think about when I think of a person. I think of like kindness, or like the warmth, or maybe the excitement level, activation level, all kinds of things that might be more salient to me. And especially as voices become more and more human-like anyway, so too might these metrics become more and more relevant, I posit.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing your view on the caveats of traditional metrics to assess synthetic speech. Let's go back to a related aspect in your career. You worked in industry and now transitioned to academia. What are the biggest differences in your experience?
So I came from the private sector, as you mentioned, and into university. And from that vantage point, I see pros and cons of both. I really like the opportunity to do kind of this experimental research where if it doesn't work out and we know why it doesn't work, that's just as an important outcome as if it does work out and we develop a software package that people can use. Whereas when I worked in the company, it was a little bit more focused not on why it works or how we know it works, but on does it work or not, and how long is it until we can make a patent application, which was, of course, fun and invigorating. But on some hand, as a scientist, what makes me tick is understanding why, especially in this era of like rapid technological advancement. It can be attractive to work at a private company and not be concerned so much about why things work or what the implications of them working are, or how ethics or social impact factors play a part there. But at university, we have to carve out a space for that discussion, because if we don't do it, nobody will. And that's not a trivial thing. We don't want a era of technological development shaped by companies pursuing corporate interest. We want a technological era that has that, but is coupled with a strong awareness of like cultural values, of ethical norms, and of community support and inclusiveness that so far previous technological advancements, to some extent or another, have typically failed to account for. speech tech is our chance, I think, as a community of scientists to deliver onto that promise and to respond to the overall lack of confidence that the general public has in science or in an institution of academia by taking a step back and saying, we're not only looking at what can we do, we're looking at what should we do? What's the right thing to do, and for whom is it right? And those are the questions that I think academia gives the space to ask, where in the private sector, for good reasons, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but there isn't much bandwidth to reflect on whether or not something should be developed. It's a question of whether or not it can be, and if there's a market to warrant its development. And that's something I think that we academics have a kind of ethical obligation to respond to. And I want to be part of that response.
Sure, yeah. No, that's a nice summary, a nice stance on that topic. I can completely relate. And as you said, like especially pushing these barriers, these state-of-the-art approaches for industry then to be appealing to invest and to see that they might have a chance. So that also relates a bit to another big project or another big topic of yours, as I see, like you offer a master in voice technology itself, and like skimming through the master, the overview of the master, it looks like it's very applied in, as you said, voice technology on the field itself. So is that something that you see as a good instrument to like have students then maybe go to industry and carry out the ideas that they learn in your group?
Well, of course, the answer is yes. It'd be surprising if I said no. I don't think it's a good one. No, it's a very good one. And before answering the question in more detail, I think it's good to step back and look at the name. The program is called MSc Voice Tech. And I wanted to take the opportunity of having this platform now to announce that we're actually pursuing a change to MSc Speech Tech. And that's a fun topic as well, because these terms kind of appear in our field collectively in different ways and mean different things to different people. When the program was developed, let's say around 4 years ago, it was conceived. It was a very different time in the field, and both terms were in use and had slightly different semantic ranges, at least according to our consensus, than they do today. At the time, it felt like voice tech was more about the technology that involves synthesis and recognition, free from semantics. If such a thing can be said anymore, I don't think so. And speech tech was much more on the semantic side of language technology as such. And in the ensuing years, a new change has kind of begun to emerge that we see, and that's that voice tech is a term more typically used in the private sector, and speech tech more in research and development. And I wanted to take this name and adjust our branding accordingly, because we are not an applied university. We're an academic university. This is a Master of Science that you get. And I think speech tech more accurately reflects that scope and that ambition of our program. We applied for it and we got academic approval to make the change. Now we apply for national approval. And if it goes through from next year on, we'll be the MSc Speech Tech. So one minor point of clarification. And now to answer the question more broadly, yes. So the program is meant to facilitate students into a career in speech tech who may have a background, maybe a little bit more general in AI or in some kind of computer science related topic, or else linguistics, but with some technical competencies in programming or similar. And it's to help them fast track themselves into a career or a startup that involves speech technology. And what we see now as time goes by, more and more of those jobs become available. There's here in the Netherlands many startups that so far have achieved actually notable success, who are on our advisory board and help shape the program, that actively recruit from our program or from our cohorts every year. And I think that there's many more coming. So so far, it looks like a nice time to be in the to make the switch, to join the program. And what we see is that many of our grads get nice jobs in the region or through our advisory board. So that's very encouraging. Of course, not everybody, and it's not a given. There's all kinds of caveats there. But right now, I see it as a nice time to go into the field and a nice time for new ideas. Look, the field is changing so rapidly that there's really a great opportunity for people with good ideas to make a splash, right? And to make visibility in the program. You see this also in the variety of thesis projects that we have every year. Like, in a more conventional program, you can pretty much guess what theses students will write. But in ours, I'm always shocked at this terrific diversity of thesis topics that students land on, despite all of the limitations, that is time limitation, compute limitation, expertise limitation that they face. They've overcome those, and we delivered some really wild ideas and projects over the past few years, and it's really been a privilege to be a part of that. So yeah, I think it's a great time for the program to launch, and I'm really psyched. One challenge, though, is that every year we kind of have to redo many of the syllabi because so much changes in the field year to year it's not possible to teach the same thing twice, right? Which is good and bad for us teachers, but good for the students, I think. So, yeah.
Thanks, Matt. I think I'm kind of thinking about whether I'm going to retake a master later because I'm also very interested in speech technology. So I'm kind of representing maybe a bachelor student and ask you the following question. So actually, can people with diversity of backgrounds also join this program? Like I'm more from a linguistic background. I don't have a lot of knowledge about computational linguistics, or I don't really know about signal processing. Is that okay for me to apply that?
Yeah, I think it depends on a few things. So what we do right now, it's okay to apply, but we're going to start to narrow the entry pool to make it a little bit more selective for our applicant base. We want to make sure that students, before they come, know something about programming, right? We're not going to test them. There's no exam or something. But what I've seen over the years is that students who know something about Python have a much better time in the program than those who don't. Those who come to the program to learn about Python, almost always don't succeed very easily, or it's so much work that it's harder for them and for the instructors to get them to the finish line. So I think we might start putting a requirement that either you have to have taken a course in Python, or at least know something about mathematics before you enter. That is a better indicator of success for some of the more advanced components of the program. At the same time, I'm also mindful of the fact that people have different ways to acquire the expertise. So I'm open to making exceptions to people who are self-taught or who have done online courses or something like that. But what I see is that students who come with just zero, who have a background in humanities, really struggle to succeed in the program. And they do ultimately, but it's not pleasant for them and not pleasant for the instructors. And so we want to send the message to the next cohort that, listen, you need some technical background. It's MSc voice or speech technology. And that word technology is not just decoration, right? So it's going to be technically challenging for you. But if you want that challenge, you can come, but just be aware of the uphill climb you'll face the further you are away from the core techniques that we teach. And to address that, we've done something also unique this year starting, is have a summer project. So for example, the entry-level summer project for people who have no background is to develop a algorithm that distinguishes male from female speech. Okay, I know that's complex and also ethically controversial. That's by design. It's a feature, not a bug, so we can discuss the ethics of it as well. But on the other hand, it's an achievable project that won't work perfectly for anybody probably, and that's also the idea. And what we want to do is get students already thinking about the technology part of the program. And in the summer project, even if they fail at doing it and don't deliver anything that works, they'll at least know if learning this way interests them, right? Did they like the summer project? Did they like struggling and failing, or did they like succeeding? Of course, also nice, as a way to kind of filter out those students who think they like speech tech because it's a popular word and brings to mind all kinds of futuristic ideas, from those who genuinely are interested in the technological part of speech tech. So we're working on having a kind of a self-selection filter or even an actual selection filter on the program to make sure that the students who join are ready for that challenge. Because I always tell them, nobody will be good at everything in this program, right? It's an interdisciplinary program. There's lots of different expertise involved, from linguistics to machine learning to even some mathematics. And if you're ready for that challenge, come along, but make sure that you're okay with being outside of your comfort zone. And many students, for very good reason, are not, and then we can send them elsewhere.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for this overview. I think that is quite nice to know what's to be expected, who's the target audience, and how individual listeners might fit in based on that. So it would be great, of course, if you're interested, go and learn more about the program. And I was also interested on a higher level on this program. So what would you say the typical graduate from this program would be capable of doing, or what they have acquired, and how would you say the key skills would be from this master? What would the motivation to learn these skills in the master?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a big diversity of profiles of graduates. So depending on how they came in and how motivated they were and what their real interests are, what resonates with them in the program. For example, sometimes students ask me, oh, when I graduate, can I get a job as a programmer? And I say, not if you can't program coming in, right? We can't teach you in just a few months how to become a programmer. So you have to also manage expectations. But students will graduate with awareness of state of the art in speech synthesis and speech recognition. Usually students focus on one of the two. So they acquire through their thesis work more expertise in one or the other based on where they would like their career. Although we also see that although students adopt that strategy, it almost doesn't matter if they're aware of both, and if they write an interesting thesis, it doesn't limit which kind of company they can work for, recognition or synthesis. And what we really say is that depending on your interest and abilities, you'll graduate with the ability to work with others in those kinds of companies that are developing this technology. So although you might not be an expert in machine learning, you'll know which kind of what class of algorithm to use to solve a certain kind of puzzle, and you'll be able to speak with experts of machine learning in a way that you couldn't until you did it before. Maybe you can actually do it yourself if you're so inclined, but for most students, it means that they'll be able to communicate with people with different technological backgrounds and help develop speech tech solutions based on their interest and expertise in a way that's collaborative and inclusive with others' backgrounds. So this interdisciplinary component is a key part of what makes, I think, an individual professionally successful. I spoke when I developed the program to people at all kinds of different companies. And what resonated with me the most is a colleague at Google. And he said, listen, we've done a lot with people who are very good at programming, right? The kind of quantitative analysis people. But what the next innovation will be is with people who come from different backgrounds, who bring different ideas together, but who can communicate to those quants. And I really think that that's what our program, I think, sets up many of our graduates to do. And you see it in the results too. So, it's too early to say, give stats about employment or where people end up. But I see people at all kinds of interesting companies. One company, for example, on our advisory board, WISP, is working on resynthesizing whispered speech for people who have speaking disorders. I think they've already hired 2 or 3 of our grads. Also other companies that have similar kind of commitment to social impact. I don't want to list them all because it's probably boring, name dropping. But they also hire our grads. And what's unique is they're not getting hired just as technologists or engineers or something, but they're getting hired as people to work with those more technical people to develop the AI and speech tech requirements of the company's profile. And that's really what we hope to see for all of our grads.
So Matt, you mentioned that the graduates can work in companies later or during the program. So we are very curious how the company is exactly involved in this program, or how it can the students, they can get access to those companies in your program, or is that easy to do that, or it still needs some efforts, or it's challenging to do so?
That's a great question and really a fun one to answer too. So the MSc program was developed by what we call the development team, which is myself and some local scholars and experts and academics working on related topics. And crucially, from the very start, it also involved an advisory board comprised of speech tech companies. And we picked a few, internationally known speech tech companies, also a few local startups. And what we did is we aligned the contents of our program first along the scientific requirements that we felt the field had, but also along the employment requirements that those people indicated to us would make our graduates attractive. And there's rarely any significant mismatch because the scientific and practical alignments usually align very nicely. But what's interesting is that we stay in touch with the advisory board, and through 2 meetings a year, reflect on what their recommendations. And they often change, of course, because the field is changing or the company pivots. And as such, I think it keeps the content of the program alive and viable and reflective of the job market, at least to the extent that we can. And as for access, well, actually we involve many members of the advisory board in the MSc itself. So they give guest lectures, some of them come in person, they host discussion groups, and even co-supervised theses sometimes, right? That's something we not only allow, but encourage. It's very difficult to pull off. That's the caveat, in that, of course, companies, they're not available on call to work with students. They don't wait for students to approach them with nice ideas. The student has to be a little bit pushy in some sense to kind of get into the company's orbit. We facilitate that as much as we can. And sometimes it works great. Sometimes the company either is not responsive or the student pivots to another idea, or time limitations are such that nobody gets delivered on. But that's part of the process. And I think also teaching students to work with companies or to communicate with companies, it's a bit different from communicating to academics and from collaborating with them. That's a skill set that's good in itself. So we tried to keep those companies really visible in our program, and we try to rotate through. We have a lot of them. We also don't want to have too many companies involved in every single course we give, because then you end up giving a kind of a corporate seminar or something. Every company, of course, is very happy to show off their techniques, but at the end of the day, we need to teach content to the students. But the students also need to know the challenges that are going on in those companies, like what are the hurdles that they're facing as they develop new products, and not that they should solve them, but that they could succeed better on the job market if they have a general idea of what the most salient issues that companies face is. So it's a tightrope walk of involving the advisory board in our programs design, but we try to do it as much as we can. And students, from what I've seen in the reviews, really like that part of the program. And actually, from the first term of the program, the companies already get involved, right? So I teach a class called Introduction to Speech Tech. And in that program, we already bring in, I don't know, like 4 or 5 companies to talk about, hey, what's the challenge in automotive and speech tech for cars? What's the challenge in speech tech for on-device applications in the medical field? What's the challenge for speech tech in video game design? And we even go to some of those companies. We take field trips. We hear from their experts, and then we try to tie it back into the learning outcomes of the course.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, thanks for this overview. And it sounds really cool that you work that closely together with the companies. And I mean, also like get some double-sided insight for the students, like on one side, seeing how the companies are working, how work is there. As you said, like maybe like they don't like it, maybe they like it, of course. You also mentioned before that it's too preliminary to give some hard numbers on how many students would like, or the employment rate, or how many students would end up in industry and so on. But do you have some experience or some feeling how many students then stay in academia, maybe pursue even a PhD, and how many move on to the startups or other companies?
Yeah, this is actually something that really surprised me. I'd like to take the lead you suggested there on the PhD topic. So the program is a 1-year master's degree, and we didn't plan on on supporting students to apply for PhD positions, because that's, in the Netherlands anyway, that's usually left to the 2-year so-called research masters. But it turns out that many of our students in the program realize they have a passion for research, which I take that as a compliment for the program, and go on to apply for PhDs. And many of them get those PhDs, which is also like something I'm tremendously proud of. It's a testament to the thesis quality that they deliver, and to the intellectual skills that they've acquired, and also the autonomy that they develop as a student in the program. And I don't know, I don't have hard numbers, right? So I wish I could say, X%, but I do know that we have a very high success rate when people apply for a PhD program. Many of them get it. That's kind of my correct summary, to not to misrepresent anything. That's something we're tremendously proud of. So we're competing, of course, those students are competing with, 2-year programs that have a much more technical orientation than ours, and they get it because I think many of the big research questions in academia are interdisciplinary, and those students can say openly, look, the machine learning part might be a bit challenging for me, but maybe I can work with somebody on your team who does that. I'll focus on the speech tech stuff, right? And a lot of the PhD positions are very pleased with that, because it's easier to bring a speech technologist into such a project than to reprofile a machine learning expert, as my intuition about why this works. And that's really encouraging to see. We also recruit from our own group. We this year we recruited 1 PhD student successfully, and last year even one of our PhD students applied to work with us and got, I think, 2 other offers at the same time. And we encouraged her to take the one at a different location for her career development. And that worked out very well. So I think it's a nice testament to the program.
So Matt, you mentioned this student got the offers from PhD program. So we are also very curious. Are there any successful stories for students who wanted to work in industry? Have most of them get offers, or do you have something in your memory which is very impressive that the student or the specific group of students, they have some stories to share?
Oh, sure, happily. I am so proud of what our students have accomplished, and I have many stories that probably could take up the entire podcast, but I'll give you a few. So in the first cohort of student year 1, we had one student who had a background in finance, which is not really the background I would think would be a good fit for our program. And he was the first applicant. So I thought, maybe he's even applied to the wrong program, or maybe it's a mistake. And he came all the way from Japan as well. And I thought, I even called him personally to make sure he knew what he was doing and that he was aware of the program. He was a tremendous success. I think he worked his tail off to succeed because he had a lot of knowledge to make up for. And he graduated cum laude and got a job right away at this really nice startup here I mentioned earlier called Wisp as an AI engineer. And he developed some of the technologies that they're using now to help people who have voicing pathologies to make themselves understood on the phone, for example. Another student in that same cohort worked on speech recognition for Luxembourgish, his native language. And he developed a technique that beat the state of the art, and now it's being used by the government of Luxembourg to do real-time transcriptions of government proceedings. He had a meeting with the Minister of Education, and he was on Luxembourgish public television. So that's a good example of the kinds of things that I think that I mentioned before, where I think academia can make a big jump and make a big contribution on topics just like that, and that's what our grads do. Also, in this current cohort, we had students who were in the first term of the academic year engaged in a competition with the Dutch Public Transport Authority to respond to a question about how to integrate AI into public transport. Very open-ended question. So, of course, their answer had to do with speech tech. They collaborated with ReadSpeaker, a Dutch multinational speech tech company, and as well as some colleagues at University Twente. And they developed not only one that got won, but I think it won the grand prize of the best project proposal, and they even got some financial remuneration for that. And again, it's not because these are the sharpest kind of technologists in town. It's because these were like highly creative, applied people with a dedicated vision who successfully communicated a project in a convincing way to the Dutch Public Transport Authority. It was a very cool idea, by the way. It was an interface of speech technology and like real world integrated gaming. So it was helping people choose like optimal transport routes, even if they're visually impaired, using voice or audio to save CO2. So it sounds a little bit more convoluted than it is. And they really made a very innovative and cool mock-up for that, and even had demoed some voices that spoke in different languages for the multilingual traveler. And it was a success. Yeah, I'm psyched. I'm really proud of them. And there's many other projects of students making, I don't want to pretend these are world-changing contributions, but these are very impressive for graduate students and extremely impressive for interdisciplinary graduate students.
Very cool. Yeah, these are quite some inspirational and very nice success stories. So thanks for sharing them, and very nice to see that that it has so much fruitful real world applications that come out of this program. So it's very nice. Along that line, I wanted to ask you about if you can pitch to some students that got maybe interested the city of Leeuwarden a bit, and maybe also like in general the atmosphere of the study program, and the venue of the masters a bit.
Yeah, sure. So city Leeuwarden, where our campus is located, is not a traditional Dutch hotspot for tourism, right? So it's a little bit off the beaten path, and I think that's really one of the nicest assets of the academic climate, is that you're going to get an authentic Dutch experience here. You're going to be a little bit secluded from the big cities like Amsterdam and Utrecht and Maastricht and so on, but you're going to have a smaller community of like-minded people, not only in your program, but in other programs, and not only in your faculty, but in other knowledge institutes. There's so-called hogescholen, like applied universities in the area too, who have similar programs in computer vision and data science, with whom we also collaborate or host events together. And what we find is a nice community arising in a way that might not have happened at a bigger university, in the sense that you really get to know your colleagues and your instructors better. The cohort is smaller. The climate is a little bit less competitive and more collaborative, I think. And if I can put in a good word for the faculty building itself, it's a historic landmark building, but inside is totally new. It's recently rebuilt in the past couple years. So it's state-of-the-art audio, video connections, and it's really nice open classrooms and lots of sunlight, and not these dusty hallways that you might remember from, I don't know, older universities, or at least I don't want to speak ill of my alma mater, but of some more larger Dutch universities where you feel kind of in an institution, or maybe you don't see sunlight for a few hours during every day, which is pretty detrimental in our faculty. I think there's lots of natural light. There's lots of interdisciplinary collaboration. There's a great cafeteria. And the Leeuwarden itself is a beautiful place because it's also a test bed for some of our research, right? So the province is invested in collaborating with us on solutions for the Fryslân language and support for them. Our students contribute to that. We have often guest lecturers from Fryslân who talk about the challenges they face, or might share details of a data set that they've released. We did that very recently, by the way. And we look at how our students can respond to those challenges if they wish. And oftentimes little projects are developed or spun off from that. So it's a fun place. Also, I think just because it's off the beaten path, it's quiet, it's safer. It's not a party city, which, take it or leave it. If you want a party city, you can just go 20 minutes to Groningen. It's not very far away. And then you come back to your safe and secluded intellectual academic environment. So I think it's the best of both worlds. Hey, and if I could put in a quick plug, if you want to check it out, you can still sign up for the Speech Tech Summer School. At the end of the month, the deadline closes for our new Speech Tech Summer School 2024. It's called Charting New Futures is the theme. It's made for students from any background, especially those who are non-technical. So I told you before that our program is a little bit more oriented towards students who have some technical skills. The summer school is very different from that. It's really interested in imagining the future of technology and considering the ethical implications of tech. There's no doubt that synthesis and recognition are the cornerstones of our field, but we want to take a step back and ask, for what are we doing synthesis and recognition? For who? Why? What's the purpose of all of this? And we think if we don't ask this now, then maybe we miss our chance before it's too late, not to shape necessarily exactly what developments come next, but to reflect on what we're doing as speech technologists. We want to inject some more reflection in the field of speech technology, and think, for example, on these kind of philosophical questions like, what is a speech sound, right? What is a sound even? And when we talk about speech sounds, are we talking about phones and paralinguistic sounds, or are we talking about like shouts, screams, whispers, opera, whistling, gasping, snorting, panting, all of the other things that our holes in our face do when we're communicating to one another? Can be part of what we call speech. Should it be part of technology too? And to what purposes? We also want to reflect on like what data is, like what is speech data? Is there such a thing as unprocessed data? Does data exist as a kind of acoustic object? And I think even other kind of profound questions that speech tech has ignored so far. For example, what's the difference between hearing and listening? When you hear a sound in the lab, and when you listen to speech in the world, these are different cognitive processes. What is the implication for our science when we develop voices with that in mind? So we take a more holistic view of the field. And again, it's a very fun hands-on summer school with people who work on human-machine interaction and robot interfaces and all kinds of other topics as well. If you're interested in these topics and you like the idea that I've discussed so far, and either you don't want to get another master's, or you don't want this master's, or you want to put your foot in the water, check out our summer school. Registration closes at the end of April, so I'm not sure if the podcast comes out before then. And if you're not sure, just register anyway, and then cancel your registration. It's free, but just get it in there, and then you can decide later on. The costs are based on your country of origin, or country of residence, so it's scaled differently depending on what country you're residing in now, to make it fair and accessible to everybody. So check it out. If you just Google Speech Tech Summer School 2024, I think it's the first hit.
Yeah, thank you very much for introducing that. Actually, we also searched something about the summer school, and we found, as you introduced, that the summer school actually interface with the master's program, like prepare the students who is not really sure about whether they want to apply for the master's program. So we have maybe a sharp question. Do the master's students really all attend that summer school, or it's like a pre-master program, or it's more like a open program for every student who want to give it a try?
Yeah, it's more for the second category. I think the master students, if they can come, but I see this more as a chance for us to do outreach to those communities of scholars or students who are working on peripheral projects, who want to dip their toes in the water. For example, we have a lot of ethicists who apply. They're working on applied issues in AI ethics. That involves a lot of issues around speech tech, and they want to become familiar with some of the main ideas there, but they're not about to sit down and start cloning a voice or something, right? That's not really in their interest. They want to reflect and discuss maybe with other people from other domains who work on similar topics, and they want to network a little bit and maybe dip their toes in the water. I'm sure some of the applicants are also interested in the program. They want to see the university. They want to meet the professors. They want to see what it's like to live in Leeuwarden. Maybe they want some ECs, the European credits, while they're at it. And we welcome those guys as well. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but mostly I think it's for undergraduates and grads who want to kind of just dip their toes in the water and see what it's about.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot. Sounds like also some nice undertaking that you can do to get more feeling for this. And I wanted to also then continue on this and check if there are some, I don't know, clear learning objectives, because the way that you portrayed it, it's quite diverging, I would say, or like quite free roaming. So also more on the philosophical side of stuff. Are there any things though that you would say, if you attend the summer school like this year or next year even, you will take away this key learning from it, or is there
Sure. Yeah, there are learning outcomes, and you ask about this year and next year, and I would say they're different every year. Our summer school last year was much more focused on the Dutch speech tech community. So we had companies send representatives up with applied projects that students would work on. So that was much more for people with technical backgrounds already who want to look at scaling up some ideas that a tech startup has, or addressing some challenge that a voice cloning company had, or looking at applications for serious gaming for speech tech and so on. So that was a lot more hands-on and speech tech oriented. That was last year, and they had very different learning outcomes. The learning outcomes of this one, I would say, one is about becoming familiar with the fundamentals of speech tech. So you should understand basically what speech synthesis and recognition are, what are the basic mechanisms behind them, and how have they changed over time, and where is the field going from as best we can guess. The second learning outcome, I would say, is about ethical and human-centered design. So we want to really reflect on the ethical considerations about our field, and how can we, especially on the topic of inclusivity and fairness, how can we make an approach to speech tech where inclusivity and fairness are baked in by design, and that's something you add later on, or not a garnish that you put on top and say, well, it's also inclusive, by the way. Like, what can we do to mitigate bias and to help deliver value to people who might have been marginalized otherwise? The third learning outcome is about scenario planning. So we want to look at how the future of speech tech might need us to prepare for a different vision of what our way of interacting with non-humans might be. So how do we interact with machines, robots, or even other kind of avatars and so on? How should it be? What can it be? And work backwards from there, and look at how we could get there, instead of saying step by step what new advancement is and where it brings us. But if we started at the end and said, how will things look maybe in 150 years? How do we want them to look? And now let's backchain how to get there from where we are now. And finally, apply problem solving and technology design. So with that in mind, we want to consider different ways to address challenges in tech design, like on integrating speech tech into different applications, not just into cars or into your phone, but where else could it be? What would a prototype look like? And how could we evaluate the value that it brings to humankind overall? So those are the four learning outcomes. They're very broad. I don't deny it. That's by design, because we want to make space for those kinds of open and fun discussions, and have a lot of debate and maybe even disagreement, but in a creative and constructive way that's oriented towards delivering, I don't know, like clear, manageable outcomes about our vision for speech tech in the form of for example, manifesto, or in the form of I don't know, one-page reflection on where we see the future of the technology going, and what that means for us today, and what it can mean for the people tomorrow. I think that's a nice exercise in itself, and I think it would be a lot of fun to do that with different generations of people from different backgrounds. So if you do too, join us.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for this nice overview. And also this one aspect that you just mentioned, I would like to pick up on that particular one on ethics and fairness in the speech technology applications. Of course, it's very prominent there, but also I think in your career, I think that is something that is like propagating throughout your career a bit. Can you reflect a bit on that, like how you touched on it, maybe like even on the underrepresented languages first, and then now going to career in speech technology, how you approached this during your research and how you still approach it currently?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because from an academic perspective, sometimes ethics gets reduced to filling out a form to get permission to run an experiment, right? And we've all seen, especially every academic has already seen those kinds of forms. And in some ways, I recognize that they're very critical, but on the other hand, they're a little bit more administratively oriented. And they're about, if I can say something maybe a bit controversial now, they're about also partially about absolving the university of legal responsibility in case something wrong happens. Well, understandably so. And that's an important part too, and we need to be mindful of that. But at the same time, I think that that's not enough, right? That's clearly not what ethics really is. Filling out a form and then getting approval for it and then running an experiment. Ethics is really about asking what should be done and how can we do it fairly. Not about how can we make it work the best by including the most data, but by looking at the data quality itself before anything happens, or by looking at, for example, the carbon cost of running a job on a supercomputer based on the potential outcome that job might have, right? And being just mindful of different facets of the research. And finally, about the implications for the research you're working on as a scientist, not just now, because every researcher that I know anyway has genuinely good ethical ambitions, but in the future. So how can we license the output in a way that's not just generic or unlicensed, but that prevents misuse by others, and that still lets you have your scientific fingerprints on it as a scientist, but makes clear that, hey, this work cannot be used for example, surveillance purposes, or indirectly or directly be used for developing technology that, monetizes human language or something like that. And this is something that I think is missing from a lot of discussions. And I can't say that we have the silver bullet, because our program also probably could focus on it more. I have a PhD student right now who's funded by the Dutch science authorities, the NWO. And he's looking specifically at the use of language technology on the border of the EU, and exploring how speech tech is often used incorrectly to classify varieties of languages of immigrants. And it gives this veneer of scientific approach, and it absolves the border agents of making difficult ethical decisions from their perspective, because they can now rely on whatever the text says. And I think this example, he approaches it very critically, is a good indication of why we must be mindful as we advance the field further, not just to do everything that we think is fun and interesting, but to consider something like dialect classification as being scientifically important and pivotal even, but that we must approach with caution and awareness of potential misuses, and develop the technology and the licensing for that technology in a way that indicates a sensitivity. And I think that's a key point that often gets overlooked. But more fun topics like helping smaller languages, or developing a commitment to open source tech releases that, of course, prevent some misguided uses that we could imagine in the future, is a very big part of our scientific fingerprint, and a very big part of my identity as a scientist. On the topic of open access, actually, it's worth mentioning that every source used in the MSc program is open access, right? So students don't have to buy any books, or do not have to use any data sets which require cost. Of course, exceptions can arise. We recognize that it's not a hill that I want to die on, but at the same time, by design, everything is open access, and all the students' output is also open access. Even students who might perform some assignments where they let us use even students who might perform some assignments where they record their voice and analyze it later on, we ask for access to that voice in our own data set that we're accumulating, and to be able to experiment on that in the future with other students as part of our mission as well. And all of this is encapsulated with a strong commitment to open access and open science.
Thank you very much for your very impressive introduction of this program, summer program and master's program. So maybe on top of that, do you have some suggestions about work-life balance for maybe summer school students, master students, or like us, PhD students? Yeah, we're very happy to learn from you about your opinions of whether it will be whether life work balance can be achieved, or how it can be achieved.
I'm so glad that you asked, because I think this is a topic that we don't talk about enough in academia, right? We just assume, we meaning instructors and students, just assume that you have to deal with it, right? Like, you have to build resilience to succeed. And I think that's so toxic. I think in some respects, academia has such a long way to go to produce an inclusive approach to real intellectual pursuits. What I tell my students, and I bet many, if they were behind me, maybe they'd be frowning at me as I say this, because they probably think that they're overworked in the program, and maybe they're right, by the way. But one thing I'm mindful of is that good work cannot be done by people who are too stressed out. You need bandwidth to really work. And for example, if there's too many competing deadlines, and one of them is, maybe a creative deadline, you can be sure that the creative work gets sacrificed for the technical work. But the real, I think, fingerprint of good science is done through reflection. Like, every good idea that I've ever had hasn't come about by sweatily meeting a deadline, at the last minute and working to push something through an arbitrary midnight deadline, but by like taking a walk offline, by disengaging from the internet, and by stopping work for a little while. I've had great ideas on vacation, mainly, like, not at university. And that's not a coincidence, right? That's how it is. And I think the academic, if I can critique academia broadly speaking, the problem with academia is that there's so much administrative workload put on students and staff sometimes that there's very little bandwidth left over for our good research and thinking and reading and discussing. Everything has kind of become, monetizable in the sense that like how many hours you have for research or how many hours you have to conduct this assignment isn't conducive, I think, to real intellectual reflection and growing. And what I wish we could do is slow down the pace of our program, or every program, by the way, or have it a bit more self-pacing opportunities possible. And also for academics, I wish that there was an opportunity for us to carve out more time that's kind of not for research or teaching, but just for like reflection and reading, which is a big part of our job, but is something that's kind of undervalued right now in the field, in academia, broadly speaking. So as for your question about achieving good work-life balance, I really believe, it's my hot take that I think people might frown at me for, of the value of going offline until it makes you uncomfortable, even and going a bit further than that. And I think that's the only way. Like really being online is so prohibitive of good ideas, I think, because there's so much stimulation there. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I'm not some hippie living on a flip phone and staying offline whenever I can. I'm also, like the rest of us, kind of constantly connected. And I don't think I don't see much value for my research there. No, I try to work offline as much as I can. I connect periodically to send and receive emails, and the rest of the time I try to work offline. And that's, I think, one of the ways in which my best ideas or most valuable contributions to the scientific community have been like offline, off the university campus, and after like a good night's rest. And it's up to us to carve that out for ourselves, because if we don't do it, nobody will, right? And if you keep accepting work, you'll keep getting work. And if you keep responding to emails, you'll keep getting emails, right? And so the secret is to mediate that as much as you can, I think, and to don't be too hard on yourself either. I also see students put a lot of pressure on themselves, especially PhD students, to deliver something by a deadline. And again, that's not conducive to good work, I don't think. My advice to any PhD student would be to say, give yourselves 3 things to do during the week, and don't put any more things on your list until those 3 things are done. I know that that's really hard, but that will help you stay focused and prioritize. So that's my advice. I try to do it myself. I don't always succeed, so I'm not an expert with this, but that's the best advice I have.
Perfect. Yeah, well, thanks so much for that. That's super good to appeal on also your self-discipline, and as you said, like really at least try out going offline. I think also the idea of not checking your emails periodically, something that I have in mind too, because yes, as you said, there's just a flood coming in, and it pulls your attention away just for some few seconds.
It's a terrible invention, right? Anybody from all over the world can contact you for any reason. I don't want that, right? I really don't want it. I need it because I can't gone out the days where you could say I don't have email. You have to have it now. But you have to carve out some freedom from it, right? So I prioritize student emails and I prioritize emails from close friends, but the rest, like, I just try not to do. And you'd be surprised how much just goes away. Don't tell that to my boss.
No, we won't. We won't, of course. And thanks for these insights. I think there's something good to see there. And so now coming toward the end of this interview, and thanks again for your very nice insights so far. We would just like to ask you a few very quick questions. So just like lightning talk, basically. Don't think too much about it. Just say what comes to your mind first. They are mostly harmless, I would say.
Okay, mostly harmless. That's the most dangerous thing I've ever heard. Okay, go for it.
So let's come to the first one. What do you do to relax during your maybe work or life?
What do I do to relax during my work life?
Work or life. Yeah, either way will be fine.
Yeah. How do I relax? I hinted at in my last answer. I go offline, I read for pleasure, and I have 2 kids. And the best way to kind of reprioritize your life is to be with little kids, because they don't care about anything else besides like having fun and enjoying life. And they're the best kind of Zen Buddhists I know, in the sense they're totally in the moment. They just want to kind of experience the curiosity and the zest for life that we all should have. And I find that the spending time with them really helps me kind of focus on what's important, and that is enjoying the time we have as best we can while we have it. So that's my stock answer.
Perfect. Yeah, that's legit. That sounds good. The next one might be also a bit tricky. Do you know any speech processing jokes? Did something come up, yeah, speech research jokes?
I'm sorry, I don't.
That's all right. Don't worry.
I should have prepared. You should have told me to think of one, and I could have. We can ask GPT to make one later on and see what it says, but I don't have one.
That's a great call indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe let's come to the next more specific question. So would you rather live without being able to say the full F sound or the P consonant? Which one you want to drop if you need to choose F or P?
That's a great question. I would rather live. I don't know. I don't have a strong preference. I'm sorry to be so diplomatic about it. I would make do with whatever one I had, and I would try to find a solution by maybe making up for the difference by making the vowels longer or something to make sure that people could still guess what sound I'm making. And in fact, I think there's very few minimal FP minimal pairs in English, right? So I think I could still be understood.
Sounds legit. Perfectly fine.
Sorry.
No, all right. This is where these questions shine. So if you would have a superpower, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one. I wish I thought of that before. I guess I would say stopping time and going back, because I could go back and like answer these questions in a really sharp way. If I had that superpower, you would know it because my answers would be much smoother and kind of I'd be more charming and funnier. But since I don't, you have to deal with this kind of clunky interview.
So next will be a bit tricky as well. What did you want, but when you were 10 years old, when you were super young, what do you want at that time?
What kind of job or what did I want in general?
In general, everything.
Okay, like for Christmas or something. I still remember a toy called a constructor set. And this is actually, maybe it's indicative of where the career ended up in the end, actually. I don't know where I got the idea. I must have seen a commercial of a kind of a constructor set where you could build a robot that moves yourself. And of course, it was a commercial in the 80s, right? That's how old I am. That tells you something already. So I'm sure it wasn't as good as it looked, but it really captured my imagination. And I asked for it for Christmas and I didn't get it. I think it was very expensive or probably hard to find or something. And I remember being disappointed about that, and still so disappointed that it still stuck with me now. And maybe that's why I built my career around doing about kind of making up for that loss over time.
Fair enough. And do you also remember what job you wanted to have when you were 10 years old?
Yeah, surprisingly, I think 10 years old, I wanted to be a eye doctor when I was 10 years old. But I was interested in vision. And I guess, that connects because vision and hearing are both senses. And my into speech technology actually came through my interest in like working on audiology and talking to people who work on cochlear implants and stuff. So it was a bit of a roundabout way, but yeah, from eye doctor to working on speech tech, I think it's a big jump. But if nothing else, that speaks to this interdisciplinary commitment that I think many of us, and including, I know a little bit about your profiles too, many of us incorporate into our lives. And I think it's a testament to how inclusive the field of speech technology is and how much we need non-classical technologists in our field. So many people in speech tech, if you talk around, I bet, come from wildly different backgrounds and had wildly different interests growing up. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we should encourage that.
So let's come to maybe the opposite one. What do you want to do when you get retired from the university? Is there any specific things come to your mind, or it's just like you want to be another person or other jobs you want to do?
I've got news for you. I'm not retiring. I said it as a joke, but every academic I know who retires has a hard time retiring, right? And that's because, the academics is not a job; it's a lifestyle, right? It's kind of it's different from stopping to be a airplane pilot or a repairman or something like that. This is a lifestyle, and I am all in on the lifestyle of like science and reading and reviewing and submitting publications and collaborating. The nice thing about retirement will be that I don't have to write grants anymore, but I still can imagine I would love to work with PhD students. That kind of stuff keeps you alive, right? If you don't have like intellectual pursuits in mind, then I think for me anyway, and I bet for you guys too, it's kind of not imaginable to keep living, right? Like I don't try to stop supervising PhDs. That's not my life goal. Or I don't try to finish the research, right? Then I would be in a different field altogether. It never ends. And that's what makes our work so compelling and so interesting. That makes our life work kind of so important for us and for each other, is that it doesn't end. You'll never solve it, right? There's no end to any of this. We don't know what will happen next. And as such, I'm not ready to retire. Not now, not ever. And, even if I won the lottery tomorrow, would I quit my job and go live on a desert island? Maybe for a few weeks, but I'm sure I'd be back, right? I would just be back. I would just bring my own funding. But I'd be back in academia, and I'd be putting my head together with my peers here and solving all kinds of fun puzzles and buying them out of their research time as well, and making fun research projects together. But this is all there is.
Perfect. No, that makes total sense. Of course, we understand.
No worries, and thanks a lot. I think we already learned a great deal about you and your research anyways. So to conclude, is there a question that you could think would be very fun to ask one of our future guests?
Maybe it could be fun to pick their mind and say, where do you imagine the future of speech technology to be in 50 years, right? And I know, we know that it's impossible to say. So with all those caveats, what do you imagine it could be like? What would you like it to be like? And how would you know if we've achieved it? Something like that.
Perfect. Will do. Thanks a lot.
Fun. Now I'm curious what they'll say. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today anyways. Matt, we learned really a great deal about you and appreciate highly your input here.
No, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much. I consider it really a terrific honor to be among the people who were interviewed by this podcast. I really like talking with you guys, and I'm so proud to be a part of this. So keep up the good work, and thanks so much again.
Yeah, thanks a lot for listening, and stay tuned for future episodes of Speech Pitch, as we might interview your favorite speech researcher in the future. Thank you very much again.
Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.